All right, let's get right into it. The date is March 30th, 2026. We are now 31 days into a conflict that was sold to the world as Operation Epic Fury. Remember that? It was supposed to be swift, decisive, a quick and done operation. Well, the reality on the ground couldn't be more different. That whole promise of a quick victory, it is completely, and I mean completely unraveled. The whole initial game plan has just, well, it's collapsed. As one new report bluntly puts it, this has shifted from a war of choice into a war of survival. And that's not just for the countries directly involved, but for the entire power structure of the region as we've known it for decades.
And this number right here, this just perfectly captures the staggering scale of the miscalculation. In only 4 weeks, the US has fired over 850 Tomahawk missiles. Now, to put that into perspective for you, that is more than the Pentagon had planned to send to Ukraine to win an entire war. We are burning through our most advanced munitions at an absolutely terrifying rate with very, very little to show for it.
So the big question is, how on earth did we get here? How did the promise of this swift, high-tech campaign just shatter so completely against the reality of an adversary who is, frankly, far more prepared and resilient than anyone expected? Let's walk through the timeline of the last 31 days. Okay, so it all kicked off back on February 28th. The objective seemed crystal clear: get rid of the regime in Tehran and put a final stop to Iran's nuclear ambitions. But then, by the middle of March, Iran retaliated by closing the Strait of Hormuz, putting a stranglehold on global energy. Then, the real shocker on March 28th, a vital billion-dollar U.S. spy plane was taken out. And that brings us to today, where the war is at a stalemate and the only talk is of a hugely dangerous ground operation. You can see how every single step has been an escalation away from those original goals. What's so fascinating here is how this conflict just devolved into this grinding, brutal war of attrition. Analysts have started using this new term for it: kinetic exhaustion. It's a fancy way of saying that the side with all the advanced tech is burning through its expensive, hard-to-replace missiles and bombs way faster than they can make them, all while getting bogged down by an enemy that can just absorb the punishment and keep fighting. And just look at the information war being fought alongside the real one. On one hand, you have the official narrative coming out of Washington and Tel Aviv claiming that 95% of Iran's missiles are gone. Poof. But then you look at what journalists at Reuters are reporting, and they're saying the U.S. can only actually confirm about a third of the arsenal has been hit. The story is that Iran is disarmed, but the reality on the ground is that they are still firing missiles and hitting targets all across the region. And if you need one perfect symbol of that underestimation, here it is. 1. A single E-3 Sentry AWACS spy plane. This is a billion-dollar flying command center, the eyes and ears of the entire battlefield, and it was destroyed. Analysts are calling this one of the most strategically consequential losses of the entire war so far. It's simple, really. You can't fight what you can't see. Now look at this number: 104. That's how many U.S. and allied bases in the region have been hit. We're not talking about minor damage. Many have been rendered, and this is the official word, uninhabitable. Think about that. It's forced American personnel to evacuate into nearby hotels and office buildings, which, let's be honest, effectively turns civilian infrastructure into human shields. And at the same time, this is happening on another front. Over 100 advanced Israeli tanks have reportedly been destroyed by Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. So, you see, this isn't some simple, single-front war. It's a multi-front pressure cooker, and the cracks are starting to show everywhere. Okay, let's pull the camera back from the battlefield for a minute, because this regional fight is sending absolutely massive shockwaves through the entire global economy. And this impacts everything, from the supply chains that stock our shelves to, yes, the price you're paying at the pump. This is where it starts to affect you directly. I mean, it really all boils down to this one question: what happens when you start squeezing the arteries of global energy trade? What happens to the health of the global body? Well, we're finding out the answer in real time. And let me tell you, the diagnosis is not good. And this chart right here, this makes that crisis deeply personal. In just 4 weeks, diesel prices have shot up 41% in the US, 52% in Australia, and a truly staggering 80% in the Philippines. This isn't some abstract economic problem on the news. This is a direct, painful hit to the wallets of consumers and industries all over the world. And believe it or not, the situation could get so much worse. We already have the Strait of Hormuz closed. Now Yemen is threatening to shut down the Bab al-Mandeb Strait as well. If that happens, another 12% of all global oil shipments could just stop. This map really shows the incredible leverage that Iran and its allies have right now. They essentially have their hands on the spigot for the world's economy.
So, this is the critical point we're at. The initial plan is in absolute ruins, the economic pain is getting worse by the day, and so both sides are now starting to consider some truly desperate, high-stakes gambles. We are getting dangerously close to the point of no return. So for the Trump administration, the frantic search is on for an off-ramp, for something, anything, they can package and sell as a victory. The plan being floated now involves these limited ground raids by Marines and Special Forces to grab a piece of land like Karg Island. But the risk is just astronomical. Military analysts are basically screaming from the rooftops that this is a ridiculous plan that would walk these troops right into a quagmire where they'd be incredibly vulnerable.
And as all these conventional military options are failing, we have to talk about the ultimate risk. This is where the conversation takes a very, very dark turn. We need to talk about Israel's Samson option. It's this long-theorized last resort strategy. It's the ultimate if we go down, you're all coming with us play, involving an overwhelming retaliation if the existence of the state itself is threatened. As Professor Stephen Starr warns, if things keep going down this path, we could be looking at a biblical Armageddon scenario. And that's the absolutely terrifying reality of where we are. As the conventional options fail, the unthinkable, well, it moves from being a theory in a textbook to a frightening possibility that's actually on the table. And that brings us to our final point. Let's talk about the ultimate unintended consequence of all this. How this conflict, a war that was specifically designed to reinforce American dominance, may have actually, accidentally, sped up the creation of a completely new world order. I mean, what we're witnessing is a complete strategic backfire on every single level. The attempt to stop Iran from getting a nuclear weapon has now made it an absolute necessity for their survival. The mission to secure energy has instead triggered a global recession, and the whole effort to assert American unipolar power has ironically just pushed more and more nations to look to Beijing, not Washington, for some kind of stability. And this right here shows you just how deep that shift goes. For decades, having a U.S. base in your country was the ultimate insurance policy for these Gulf monarchies. It meant protection. Now, they're seen as missile magnets. They're just giant targets that attract Iranian attacks. Their greatest security asset has become their single biggest liability, forcing a complete 180 in how the entire region thinks about security. Which leaves us with this one final, really provocative thought. This war was started to enforce and restore an old, familiar world order. But when you look at the chaos and the wreckage after just 1 month, you have to ask yourself, have these first 31 days accidentally built a brand new one?
Right now, as you listen to this, the United States military is firing these multi-million-dollar, highly sophisticated interceptor missiles into the desert sky.
Yeah.
And they're doing this to shoot down incoming enemy drones that, frankly, cost less than a used Honda Civic.
Right, the financial asymmetry is just, it's wild.
It is, and the terrifying, unavoidable math of this conflict is painfully simple. The wealthiest military coalition in human history is going to run out of expensive missiles long before its adversary runs out of cheap drones.
Exactly.
So welcome to Monday, March 30th, 2026. Today marks the 31st day of the joint U.S.-Israeli military campaign against Iran.
Which, was originally branded with that highly confident moniker, Operation Epic Fury.
Right, Epic Fury,
Yeah.
a campaign that we were assured 31 days ago would be wrapped up in a matter of days.
Yeah, well, the contrast between the press conferences of late February and the grim operational reality of late March is staggering. I mean, we are witnessing the real-time collapse of a deeply entrenched military doctrine.
And you, the listener, have likely been watching this unfold on your screens just like we have. You've seen the shifting goalposts, the market volatility.
Endless breaking news banners.
Exactly. So to cut through that immense fog of war and the, frankly, overwhelming amount of political posturing coming from all sides, we've spent the last 48 hours doing a massive sweep of the raw data.
A really deep dive into the sources.
Right. We're pulling this analysis together from a vast stack of recent material, mostly spanning the last couple of days. So we're looking at frontline journalist reports, leaked geopolitical intelligence briefings surfacing online, some incredibly detailed economic market forecasts.
And we also went through long-form interviews with some of the most globally recognized military and economic analysts, the ones that have been populating YouTube and independent media over the weekend.
Right. And the mission for our deep dive today is to objectively map out the trajectory of this crisis. We are moving past the daily tactical updates to understand the systemic shifts.
Yeah, how did a localized kinetic exchange mutate into a multi-front war of attrition?
Exactly. And more importantly, what are the most likely scenarios for the upcoming weeks? So the title of today's deep dive is 2026-0330, Trump's Desperate Search for a Victory and Israeli's Samson Option.
It's a heavy title.
It is. But to really grasp what is happening on the ground, we have to recognize that this is no longer a traditional war. Looking at the analysis, we are watching a catastrophic collision.
Between two completely different eras of warfare.
Right. On one side, you have 20th century conventional military thinking, the belief in overwhelming technological superiority, massive aircraft carriers, precision airstrikes.
And on the other side, you have 21st century asymmetric warfare. It's decentralized, it's deeply entrenched, and it's economically asymmetrical.
And the defining characteristic of this collision, and the phrase that appears repeatedly across our stack of geopolitical briefings, is kinetic exhaustion.
Yeah, kinetic exhaustion. It's a huge theme right now. Western forces are currently experiencing a severe depletion of critical munitions and hardware.
I mean, the trillion-dollar technological shield is basically failing to secure a decisive win against an adversary fighting a fundamentally different type of war.
So true.
Let's dive straight into the mechanics of that exhaustion, because the numbers here completely dismantle the original strategy. Military planners operate on a concept called escalation dominance, right?
Right. The theory goes that if you apply an immediate, overwhelming level of sheer destructive power, like shock and awe.
The adversary will look at the ladder of escalation,
Yeah.
realize they're outmatched, and simply fold.
Exactly. They submit because fighting back looks like suicide. It's a doctrine heavily rooted in Cold War theory and conflicts against vastly inferior state militaries.
So it assumes a rational actor making a cost-benefit analysis where preserving infrastructure is the highest priority.
Yeah, the assumption in Washington and Tel Aviv was that a massive initial wave of airstrikes would paralyze Iranian leadership, shatter their command and control, and potentially, trigger internal regime change.
Without the need for a protracted ground campaign.
Right. But the math of attrition over the last 31 days has turned that theory into a lethal trap. Let's look at what our sources call the interceptor crisis.
Oh, this card is wild.
It really is. According to the compiled intelligence, the U.S.-Israeli coalition expended roughly 800 Patriot missiles in just the first 5 days of this campaign.
800. In 5 days.
Yeah. And to understand the gravity of that number, we have to look at the defense industrial base. The entire global annual manufacturing capacity for Patriot missiles is roughly 750 units.
Wait, hold on. Let's really spell out the implications of that for you listening right now. The coalition burned through more than a year's worth of the entire planet's production capacity.
In less than a week.
In less than a week. I mean, we are talking about highly complex artisanal pieces of engineering packed with solid rocket fuel, advanced radar seekers, and rare earth minerals.
Yeah, you can't just flip a switch in a factory and print 1,000 more tomorrow.
You absolutely cannot.
The supply chains for these interceptors involve dozens of subcontractors across multiple countries. They rely on highly specialized labor and materials that have lead times of months, sometimes years.
So the West built a military apparatus designed for short, sharp, decisive interventions.
Exactly. It is not structurally designed for a high-intensity, sustained war of attrition.
Right. When an adversary like Iran utilizes a strategy of launching continuous swarms of loitering munitions and cheap ballistic missiles, they're essentially attacking the Western supply chain.
Yeah, they forced the coalition to trade a $3 million interceptor for a $20,000 drone. You run out of the expensive shield long before they run out of the cheap sword.
And it is not just the defensive shield that is cracking. The offensive spear is dulling incredibly fast.
Oh, the Tomahawk numbers.
Yeah, the reports indicate that over 850 Tomahawk cruise missiles have been fired into Iranian territory over the last 4 weeks.
And the Tomahawk is the premier standoff weapon of the U.S. Navy.
Right. Firing 850 of them is a massive drain on U.S. stockpiles. And the most glaring takeaway from the intelligence assessments, this unprecedented barrage has failed to achieve the core objective.
There has been no regime change.
None. The Iranian command structure remains heavily intact.
And the failure to break that command structure forces a dangerous reallocation of global assets. Because the coalition is burning through air defense systems at an unsustainable velocity to protect regional assets, Washington has initiated this desperate scavenging operation.
They're pulling vital air defense umbrellas from other critical theaters to plug the holes in the Middle East. Which brings us to a geopolitical maneuver that has absolute shockwaves running through the Pacific.
Yeah, this is a huge deal.
The intelligence briefings highlight that the U.S. administration has quietly ordered the removal of Portrays batteries, that's the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense System, out of South Korea.
And they have done this against the express, vocal wishes of the South Korean government.
Why is that such a big deal for people who might not follow Asian geopolitics?
Well, TA is essentially the crown jewel of ballistic missile defense. South Korea relies on that specific radar and interceptor system to monitor and neutralize the constant threat of short and medium-range launches from North Korea.
So by physically uprooting those batteries, loading them onto C-17s, and flying them to the Persian Gulf to cover the gaps left by depleted Patriot systems.
The United States is signaling to Pyongyang and Beijing that the Pacific theater is temporarily exposed.
Wow.
Yeah. It forces allied nations in Asia to question the reliability of the U.S. security umbrella. Like, if those assets can be repossessed the moment a crisis erupts in the Middle East, what good are they?
It's robbing Peter to pay Paul on a thermonuclear scale.
It really is.
But this raises a massive question. If the coalition has fired 850 Tomahawks and countless other ordinances, how is the Iranian military still functioning?
Geology.
Right, the geology. For 3 decades, while the U.S. was refining stealth fighters and smart bombs, Iran was digging. We are dealing with subterranean fortresses.
Yeah, the intelligence sources detail a massive network of what are referred to as missile cities. These are not standard military bunkers, you know?
No, they were sprawling, interconnected, subterranean complexes buried up to 1,500 feet deep.
And the crucial detail here isn't just the depth, it's the material. They are carved into the Zagros Mountains, which are composed of solid granite.
For context for the listener, granite is roughly 25 times harder, denser, and more structurally sound than standard military-grade reinforced concrete.
The physics of conventional air power simply break down against that kind of geology. I mean, take a GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator.
That's the largest bunker buster in the U.S. arsenal, right?
Exactly. It's designed to punch through maybe 60 feet of reinforced concrete before detonating. It relies on kinetic energy and a hardened steel casing.
Okay, so what happens when you drop that on a mountain?
It might carve out a crater at the surface, but it does absolutely nothing to a facility buried a quarter-mile deep in solid igneous rock. And inside these complexes, Iran has built internal railway logistics, climate-controlled storage for solid propellant missiles, and dispersed pop-up launch shafts.
I read the description of those pop-up shafts in the sources, and the engineering is just brilliant in its simplicity.
Oh, yeah.
Like, a heavy blast door on the surface slides open, a missile is elevated from the depths, it fires, and the door slides shut again in a matter of minutes.
Yep. By the time a U.S. satellite detects the thermal bloom of the launch and vectors a bomber to strike the coordinates, the door is closed.
And the launch crew is safely drinking tea 1,500 feet below ground.
Exactly. This completely explains the failure of the shock and awe campaign. The military planners relied heavily on the psychological impact of escalation dominance.
Right. They assumed that even if the bombs couldn't reach the deepest missiles, the sheer volume of destruction on the surface would cause the political regime to fracture.
But a state apparatus that has spent 30 years specifically preparing to endure a technologically superior air campaign does not easily panic.
It's like trying to sledgehammer a bank vault. But the vault is the size of a mountain range, and the people inside are casually slipping notes under the door every hour.
That's a great analogy. And the operational reality on day 31 proves this endurance.
Because initially, press briefings from the IDF and the Pentagon claimed that up to 70% of Iran's missile arsenal had been neutralized.
But the leaked assessments we are reviewing now paint a starkly different picture. Iran maintains a steady, highly disciplined launch rate of roughly 30 ballistic missiles a day.
And it is crucial to note the quality of those munitions. They are not merely relying on older, inaccurate Scud-style rockets.
No, the daily barrages include advanced Khorramshahr for medium-range ballistic missiles and newer hypersonic variants.
And those platforms are equipped with maneuvering re-entry vehicles, right? Making them exponentially more difficult for depleted Patriot and David's sling batteries to intercept. So, synthesizing this for you listening, The air campaign has mathematically failed to crack the granite. Washington is rapidly depleting its multi-million-dollar interceptors and offensive cruise missiles.
The adversary remains secure and continues a steady drumbeat of daily retaliatory strikes.
And this strategic dead end is precisely what forces administrations to pivot toward incredibly dangerous, previously unthinkable alternatives.
Right.
Because if you cannot bomb the mountain into submission from 30,000 feet, you are backed into a corner where you have to send people in on the ground to do what the bombs couldn't.
Yeah, the pivot toward a ground campaign is the natural, albeit perilous, next step when kinetic exhaustion sets in from the air. But launching a ground invasion requires staging areas, logistics hubs, and secure forward operating bases.
Which exposes the next massive vulnerability we found in the sources. Before we even talk about the invasion plans, we have to look at the catastrophic state of the U.S. footprint in the region. It's terrible. The Iranian retaliation hasn't just been random lashing out. It has been a methodical, calculated dismantling of the logistical infrastructure the U.S. relies on to project power.
The numbers provided by regional military analysts are grim. Over 104 American and regional allied bases have been targeted by Iranian drone and missile strikes.
104 bases.
Yeah. And the cumulative damage has rendered roughly 13 of those bases completely uninhabitable. They have been knocked offline.
Runways cratered, fuel depots ignited, radar installations shredded by shrapnel.
Right.
What shocked me the most in these reports is the profound lack of preparation. These are billion-dollar installations, the hubs of American power projection in the Middle East.
But the sources indicate that the vast majority of these U.S. bases in the Gulf lack adequate underground shelters to withstand a sustained multi-week ballistic missile campaign.
It reveals a systemic hubris within military planning.
Oh, absolutely. For decades, the assumption was that the U.S. air defense umbrella was hermetic. The belief was that a Patriot battery or a phalanx point defense system would swat away anything coming at a base.
So pouring billions of dollars into hardening facilities and building subterranean bunkers wasn't deemed a priority.
Exactly. And when the adversary utilizes swarm tactics that overwhelm those defenses, the personnel on the ground are left completely exposed.
The exposure is so severe that operators are literally abandoning military infrastructure.
Yeah.
The intelligence reports detail that U.S. personnel, intelligence officers, and drone operators have been forced to evacuate these bases.
They are currently conducting active military missions from rented civilian hotels and leased office spaces in neighboring Gulf countries.
Which is insane. They are hiding among civilian infrastructure because the designated military fortresses are too dangerous to sleep in.
And that vulnerability has resulted in some staggering material losses. Perhaps the most strategically devastating kinetic loss for the coalition so far occurred at Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia.
This is a massive turning point in the timeline of the last 30 days. An Iranian strike package managed to penetrate the overlapping defenses at Prince Sultan and successfully destroyed a U.S. E-3 Sentry AWACS spy plane on the tarmac.
Now, for listeners who aren't steeped in aviation tech, an AWACS, that stands for Airborne Warning and Control System, is that massive Boeing 707 you see with the giant rotating radar dome mounted on top of the fuselage.
It is the absolute eye in the sky.
It manages the entire battle space. A ground-based radar is limited by the curvature of the Earth and terrain features. It cannot see a cruise missile flying 50 feet off the ground until it is very close.
Right, but an AWACS flies at 30,000 feet, looking down with Doppler radar. It can see every aircraft, every drone, and every low-flying missile for hundreds of miles in any direction.
And it instantly vectors interceptors to meet them.
And these planes are incredibly expensive, running anywhere from $700 million to $1 billion each. But the monetary cost is almost irrelevant compared to the strategic deficit.
Yeah, the U.S. only has 16 of these aircraft left in its entire global inventory.
16 in the whole world.
Right. The scarcity is the vulnerability. With 40% of that total inventory already tied up in the Gulf theater, the loss of even one airframe creates a massive blind spot.
And there is no active production line to build a replacement, right?
Yeah.
The E-3 is a legacy airframe.
Exactly. By destroying that AWACS, Iran executed a highly successful blinding operation. They have degraded the coalition's ability to see over the horizon.
Which in turn degrades the ability to intercept the next wave of attacks.
It's a vicious cycle.
It really is. The coalition is losing its eyes, it's losing its staging bases, and it's running out of the missiles needed to defend what's left.
And the domestic political pressure in Washington to deliver a tangible, televised win to justify this massive expenditure and the escalating casualties is reaching a boiling point.
Which brings us to the desperation that is driving the leaked Pentagon plans for an imminent ground operation.
Yeah, the troop movements are no longer theoretical. They are highly visible.
Right. The USS Tripoli, which is an America-class amphibious assault ship, has recently arrived in the region carrying an expeditionary unit of 3,500 Marines.
And these forces are joining a larger mass of roughly 10,000 troops that have been quietly staged in the theater over the last month.
But looking at the geography, you obviously can't just march 10,000 light infantry troops onto the Iranian mainland.
No, you are talking about a mountainous country with a deeply nationalistic million-man standing army. It would be a generational bloodbath.
So according to the military analysts reviewing these leaks, the targets are islands. Specifically, the administration is reportedly eyeing the seizure of Karg Island.
And Karg Island is incredibly significant. It is a rocky island in the Persian Gulf that serves as Iran's primary sea island terminal for crude oil exports.
So seizing it would theoretically cripple Iranian economic revenue.
That's the idea. The other potential targets are the Lesser Tums, a small chain of fortified islands near the Strait of Hormuz.
And the political rhetoric around this is already escalating, with President Trump reportedly joking in private circles about capturing the waterway and renaming it the Strait of Trump.
Right.
But looking at the tactical realities we just discussed, I have to question the logic here. Several analysts in our source stack are openly aghast at this plan.
I mean, applying World War II island-hopping amphibious tactics to a 21st century drone war seems highly flawed.
If the U.S. has lost its AWACS radar coverage and the bases are getting hammered, aren't we just taking thousands of Marines, putting them on a fortified rock in the Gulf, and turning them into static targets for the very drones and missiles we can no longer intercept?
Yes. The tactical risks of an amphibious assault in this environment are astronomical. We live in an era of constant ISR intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance.
Right, there's no longer any element of surprise.
Exactly. The moment an amphibious task force begins maneuvering toward Karg Island, it is tracked by commercial satellites, Iranian coastal radar, and high-altitude drones.
So the Marines would have to secure beachheads overlooked by elevated terrain under the constant threat of precision-guided mortars and loitering munitions.
It's frankly a nightmare scenario.
If the military planners know it's a meat grinder, why push for it?
It comes back to the political timeline of kinetic exhaustion. A ground invasion that results in planting a flag on Karg Island or capturing a specific subterranean bunker and hauling out a cache of uranium centrifuges provides a physical trophy.
Ah, it is a highly visual, symbolic victory that can be broadcast on domestic news networks.
Exactly. The administration is essentially betting that a short, sharp, bloody, tactical victory will secure enough political capital back home to prevent domestic support for the war from completely collapsing.
Even if it does little to alter the broader strategic reality of Iranian resilience.
Right.
So it's prioritizing a PR victory over strategic logic, placing immense risk on the troops on the ground. But, the U.S. is not fighting this war in a vacuum.
No, it's not.
The desperation driving Washington toward a ground invasion is mirroring the profound crisis facing its primary ally in the region. Israel is fighting a simultaneous, multi-front war of attrition.
A war that is pushing the state to its absolute structural and psychological breaking point.
And this brings us to the most volatile aspect of the entire conflict, the potential for ultimate escalation.
The situation in Israel requires a deep analysis of both the military attrition and the resulting domestic collapse. We have to look at the northern front.
Right.
As the air campaign against Iran began, Israel expanded its ground invasion deep into southern Lebanon to neutralize Hezbollah's rocket forces and secure its northern border.
But the terrain of southern Lebanon is notoriously difficult, and the adversary has evolved significantly. The reality detailed in the Frontline Journalist reports is grueling.
Hezbollah is no longer just firing unguided Katyusha rockets. They have integrated highly sophisticated asymmetric technology into their infantry units.
Most notably, the use of advanced fiber optic drones.
And the implementation of fiber optic drones fundamentally alters the armored battlefield.
How so?
Well, traditionally, military drones are controlled via radio frequencies. To protect a tank, you mount electronic warfare jammers that flood those frequencies with noise, severing the connection between the drone and the operator, causing the drone to crash.
Right. The jammers create a sort of invisible shield.
Exactly. But a fiber optic drone bypasses the electromagnetic spectrum entirely.
Right. The reports detail that these drones trail a literal physical spool of hair-thin glass fiber optic cable behind them.
Sometimes stretching for 10 kilometers.
That's insane. So the video feed and the flight commands are transmitted as pulses of light through the glass.
And you cannot jam a physical cable with radio waves.
You just can't. And because they are immune to electronic jamming, they can bypass the highly touted active protection systems on Israeli armor, like the Trophy system.
And the results of this technological bypass have been devastating. Our sources confirm that over 30 Israeli Merkava tanks have been destroyed or permanently disabled in the southern Lebanon theater over the last month.
The Merkava is widely considered one of the most heavily armored, sophisticated main battle tanks on the planet.
It is.
Losing 30 of them in 30 days equates to a staggering loss of roughly $600 million in heavy armor alone.
To say nothing of the highly trained tank crews, that level of attrition of heavy armor is simply unsustainable for a military the size of the IDF.
And the attrition of hardware is directly translating into an attrition of manpower, which is triggering a profound internal crisis within the Israeli state.
Yeah, according to leaked domestic intelligence memos, the military chief of staff recently issued a stark red flag warning to the prime minister's cabinet.
What did it say?
The assessment stated unequivocally that the IDF faces a potential operational collapse without an immediate, massive influx of manpower. To sustain the multi-front war in Gaza, Lebanon, and the defensive posture against Iran, the government is attempting to draft 400,000 reservists.
We have to put that number into the context of the demographics for you listening. Israel is a nation of fewer than 10 million citizens.
Yeah.
Attempting to mobilize 400,000 working-age adults effectively halts the civilian economy. Teachers, engineers, tech sector workers, logistics managers, the entire economic engine of the state disappears into uniform.
Furthermore, this draft is igniting intense domestic friction that threatens the stability of the governing coalition.
Right. There is massive societal pushback regarding the ultra-Orthodox communities, who have traditionally secured exemptions from mandatory military service.
As secular Israelis bear the brutal brunt of the casualties in Lebanon, the refusal of the ultra-Orthodox to join the war effort is creating a profound fracture in national unity.
The psychological toll of this multi-front war is almost unimaginable. Millions of Israelis are spending their nights in bomb shelters as air raid sirens become a permanent fixture of daily life.
The tech-heavy economy is hemorrhaging foreign capital.
And to illustrate just how dire the psychological state of the leadership has become, there are deeply surreal contingency plans surfacing in mainstream Israeli media.
This part is wild.
It really is. Outlets like Haaretz have published investigative reports detailing how government officials have quietly explored the logistics of purchasing sovereign islands from Greece
To serve as massive, fortified evacuation zones for Israeli citizens.
When a modern technologically advanced state begins exploring the legal and logistical framework for evacuating a portion of its populace to foreign islands, you are witnessing a society grappling with the genuine fear of existential defeat.
Absolutely. And we also need to impartially report on the massive international scrutiny this campaign is drawing. As the war stretches into its second month, the humanitarian toll in the surrounding regions is dominating global headlines.
Right. And looking at the sources impartially, the journalistic reports we reviewed include severe documentation from Lebanon regarding strikes on civilian infrastructure.
The documented numbers cite 51 healthcare workers killed in the last month, including 46 frontline paramedics.
There are also mounting reports from international observers of targeted strikes on clearly marked press vehicles, resulting in the deaths of several high-profile journalists.
Now, the military justification provided for these strikes typically revolves around the blurring of lines between combatants and civilians in asymmetric urban warfare, claiming that Hezbollah utilizes medical and press infrastructure for cover.
However, regardless of the justification, the sheer scale of the strikes on humanitarian personnel is isolating Israel diplomatically.
Severing crucial alliances precisely at the moment it requires international support to weather the economic and kinetic exhaustion.
And it is this exact pressure cooker, the staggering tank losses in Lebanon, the economic freefall, the diplomatic isolation, and the sheer exhaustion of fighting on three fronts that brings us to the absolute edge of the nuclear threshold.
Yeah.
Because amidst this chaos, Tehran sent a highly specific, deeply calculated message.
The hypersonic strike in the Negev desert.
Right. According to the intelligence briefings, Iran launched an advanced hypersonic ballistic missile that traveled precisely toward the Dimona nuclear reactor facility.
But it didn't hit the reactor?
No. It intentionally impacted the empty desert sand just a short distance outside the facility's perimeter?
It was a demonstration of capability designed to induce maximum psychological pressure. Dimona is arguably the most heavily defended airspace in the Middle East.
So by placing a highly advanced maneuvering weapon directly adjacent to the reactor without it being intercepted, Tehran was delivering a blunt message.
Your multi-tiered defense architecture, the Iron Dome for short range, David's Sling for medium range, and the Aerosystem for exo-atmospheric threats is porous.
We have the capability to penetrate the shield and strike your existential core whenever we choose.
And that realization that the shield is broken and the state is exhausting its resources pushes the psychological state of leadership toward the darkest corner of geopolitical theory, the Samson option.
Let's break down exactly what this means, because the term gets thrown around a lot, but the reality is apocalyptic.
It is. The Samson option refers to the theoretical deterrent strategy surrounding Israel's undeclared nuclear arsenal. Independent watchdogs estimate Israel possesses between 300 and 400 nuclear warheads.
Deliverable via Jericho ballistic missiles, submarine-launched cruise missiles, and aircraft.
Right. And the doctrine is named after the biblical figure Samson, who, after being captured and blinded by the Philistines, used his remaining strength to push apart the pillars of the temple,
Bringing the roof down to crush himself and his enemies simultaneously.
It's not a military strategy for winning a war. It is a geopolitical dead man's switch.
It's like a bank robber wiring themselves with high explosives and handing the detonator to the SWAT team.
Exactly. The doctrine dictates that if the state of Israel faces imminent, undeniable destruction, if the conventional military collapses and the borders are overrun, the leadership will utilize its entire nuclear arsenal to annihilate its enemies.
Ensuring that if Israel falls, the entire region turns to glass alongside it.
And we must balance this with the intelligence regarding Iran's nuclear breakout capacity. The experts and our sources assess that Iran, having enriched uranium to 60% purity for years, now possesses enough fissile material to produce 9 to 10 highly enriched 15-kiloton nuclear warheads within a matter of weeks.
They possess the delivery mechanisms, and the physics of weaponization are globally understood. They do not require a live test to field a credible threat.
If either side crosses that threshold, the localized effects described in the assessments by experts like Dr. Theodore Postal are horrific.
A 15-kiloton detonation, which is roughly the size of the Hiroshima bomb over a modern Middle Eastern city, would ignite massive firestorms consuming entire metropolitan grids within hours.
The immediate blast and thermal radiation would result in 300,000 to 400,000 casualties per strike.
And the resulting fallout would generate highly radioactive black rain, rendering vast agricultural and urban tracts uninhabitable for generations.
This brings us to the crux of the nuclear dilemma. We discussed escalation dominance earlier, which fundamentally relies on deterrence.
Right. Deterrence works because both actors want to survive. The fear of retaliation keeps the weapons in their silos.
But the Samson option fundamentally breaks the logic of deterrence.
Because deterrence assumes rationality. If a state believes its existence is ending, if the government is collapsing, the economy is gone, and the military is defeated, the traditional rules evaporate.
Wars of survival breed terrifying irrationality.
If you believe you're going to die tomorrow regardless, you have absolutely nothing left to lose by pushing the button today.
Exactly. The threshold for nuclear use lowers drastically when a regional power faces extinction. Or, to bring it back to the Gulf, if the United States executes a ground invasion of Karg Island and the Marines are suddenly surrounded and facing a catastrophic slaughter by drone swarms.
The domestic political pressure on the U.S. president to authorize a low-yield tactical nuclear strike to save American lives would be immense.
It is an incredibly sobering reality. We are watching the guardrails of the nuclear age strain under the weight of kinetic exhaustion.
And while the threat of nuclear fire looms over the Middle East, a very different kind of fire is already burning rapidly through the global economy.
This brings us to the ripple effects of this war because the conflict is not contained.
Right. The physical blockades and the destruction of infrastructure in the Gulf are fundamentally altering the daily life of every listener tuning in and reshaping the entire global world order.
The transition from a localized war to a global economic crisis runs directly through the arteries of international trade, specifically the choking of the Strait of Hormuz.
Which is massive. Roughly 20% of the world's total global oil consumption passes through that narrow waterway every single day.
And what is utterly fascinating about the current status of the strait is how it has been closed. Iran hasn't physically lined up gunboats shoulder to shoulder to block the water.
They have in mind every inch of the channel.
They don't need to. They are utilizing asymmetric warfare against the financial mechanisms of global shipping.
Right. By demonstrating the capability to hit commercial vessels with drones and anti-ship missiles, they have caused the international maritime insurance syndicates out of Lloyd's of London and Europe to entirely pull their coverage for the region.
This is a blockade by actuarial table. Modern global trade is entirely reliant on insurance.
If a shipping conglomerate cannot secure insurance for a multi-million-dollar supertanker and the $100 million worth of crude oil sitting in its hull, that ship does not sail. Full stop.
The risk of total loss is too immense for any corporation to bear out of pocket.
And to add a profound geopolitical insult to this economic injury, our sources report that Iran has essentially converted the Strait of Hormuz into a toll road.
Yeah, they are allegedly allowing certain commercial ships, specifically those not aligned with the Western coalition, to pass through the strait. But they are charging a massive protection fee.
Reports indicate the toll is roughly $2 million per ship.
And crucially, they are demanding that this fee be paid not in US dollars, but in Chinese yuan.
The demand for payment in yuan is a calculated strike against the petrodollar system. By forcing international shipping companies to acquire and transact in Chinese currency to navigate the globe's most vital energy choke point, Tehran is actively accelerating the de-dollarization of global trade.
And the squeeze on the oceans doesn't stop at Hormuz. Down in Yemen, the Houthi movement has officially escalated their involvement in the wider war.
They are threatening to completely close the Bab el-Mandeb Strait.
That strait is the gateway to the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. Severing Bab el-Mandeb effectively cuts the most direct maritime link between European markets and Asian manufacturing.
So commercial vessels are now forced to reroute all the way around the southern tip of Africa, around the Cape of Good Hope.
Which adds weeks to transit times, creates massive logistical bottlenecks at African ports, and exponentially increases fuel and labor costs.
And the fuel itself is becoming incredibly scarce because the energy sector devastation in the Gulf has been staggering. The Iranian retaliation didn't just target U.S. military bases.
No, they struck the regional infrastructure supporting the coalition. The intelligence indicates that Iranian strikes wiped out roughly 50% of Qatar's liquefied natural gas, or LNG, export capacity.
50%. The combination of the blockades, the insurance crisis, and the physical destruction of Qatari LNG facilities has sent energy markets into an absolute panic.
Brent crude oil has already spiked past $100 a barrel. The economic forecasts in our STACK project that as the kinetic exhaustion deepens, crude could easily hit $138. And in a worst-case scenario involving prolonged ground combat, it could surge to $200 a barrel.
Let's translate that for you listening, because $200 a barrel isn't just a painful day at the gas pump. It is a mathematical guarantee of a severe U.S. and global economic recession.
Fuel costs are baked into the final price of literally every physical good you purchase.
If the cost to power the cargo ship, the freight train, and the delivery truck doubles, the cost of the goods on the shelf doubles.
But the crisis extends far beyond the gas pump and the Amazon delivery truck. And this is where the geopolitical ripples become deeply frightening for the average citizen.
Because the Gulf region isn't just the world's petrol station. It is the beating heart of global urea and nitrogen fertilizer production.
Exactly. This requires a quick dive into agricultural chemistry. The modern world feeds itself using the Haber-Bosch process, which synthesizes ammonia for fertilizer.
That process is massively energy intensive and relies heavily on natural gas.
So by knocking out Qatar's LNG and blockading the Gulf, the supply of the world's most critical fertilizers has been severely bottlenecked.
And timing is everything in agriculture. This disruption is occurring exactly during the Northern Hemisphere's critical spring planting season.
Without sufficient nitrogen fertilizer flowing out of the Gulf, crop yields across North America, Europe, and Asia will plummet.
This isn't a theoretical economic model. This translates directly into a massive global food security crisis that will hit supermarket shelves later this year.
When you combine the lack of fertilizer with the skyrocketing cost of fuel to run the tractors and the trucks, the supply chains that deliver our food are being paralyzed.
The reports show that diesel prices are up 41% in the United States in just 4 weeks. In developing nations, the pain is even sharper. In places like the Philippines, diesel is up 81%.
Try running a commercial farming operation or an independent trucking fleet when your primary overhead cost nearly doubles in a single month.
You can't. This level of rapid, ubiquitous economic pain inevitably drives massive domestic unrest and a profound geopolitical realignment.
We have to report impartially on the domestic reaction within the United States, because the economic fallout has triggered unprecedented public mobilization.
The sources detail the rise of the No Kings protests. Over the weekend, an estimated 8 million Americans marched in cities across the country.
They are protesting the runaway inflation, the crippling gas prices, the looming threat of drafting troops for a ground war, and the sheer opaque cost of Operation Epic Fury.
The public is reacting to the immediate economic pain, but historians and economists are looking at the bizarre, unintended secondary effects of this conflict.
Look at the global energy market landscape right now. By destroying 50% of Qatar's LNG export capacity, the United States' military actions have accidentally cemented the U.S. as the undisputed, dominant, top exporter of LNG in the world.
That is a staggering irony. American domestic energy conglomerates are currently raking in unprecedented record profits because their primary global competitor in Qatar was blown up by Iran in a war that Washington initiated.
Meanwhile, allied European economies, already starved of Russian gas, are now cut off from Qatari gas, forcing them to buy American LNG at massive premiums.
And the entanglement of global crises doesn't end there. The sources highlight a truly surreal proxy war crossover happening in real time.
Yeah. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is currently conducting an active diplomatic tour of the Gulf states.
While his own country is fighting a massive war of attrition against Russia, Zelensky is in the Middle East.
Yes. He is navigating the geopolitical chaos, signing security pacts, and offering battle-tested Ukrainian expertise in drone warfare and localized air defense to wealthy, terrified nations like Saudi Arabia and Qatar.
Furthermore, Ukrainian intelligence is actively claiming that Russian intelligence agencies are providing highly advanced, real-time satellite imagery to Tehran.
They allege this Russian data is precisely what allowed Iran to successfully target and destroy the U.S. AWACS plane and bypass the Patriot batteries.
It is a total chaotic blending of the world's fault lines. So looking at all of this, the blockades, the drone swarms, the inflation, the geopolitical maneuvering, I have to ask, what is the long-term impact on the architecture of global trade?
It's a fundamental shift.
Because if you are a nation in Asia, Africa, or Europe right now, and you are watching your energy supply get blown up, your maritime routes severed, and your food supply threatened solely because of Washington's foreign policy choices in the Middle East, don't you instantly start looking for an exit strategy?
Of course you do.
Are we literally watching the death of globalization as we know it?
We are watching the aggressive, accelerated unraveling of the unipolar globalized system. This is the ultimate, catastrophic, unintended consequence of the belief in escalation dominance.
Nations across the globe are realizing that deep dependency on the U.S. security umbrella and the U.S. dollar-denominated trade system is no longer a safe bet. It is a massive systemic vulnerability.
They are retreating into deep protectionism. They are scrambling to build redundant, localized supply chains that bypass Western choke points.
Geopolitically, the middle powers of the world are increasingly looking to Beijing and the expanding BRICS coalition for alternative financial systems and stability.
The attempt by the United States to cement its unipolar hegemony through conventional military force has paradoxically thrown gasoline on the birth of a multipolar world.
It's a stunning historic backfire.
It truly is. The landscape has fundamentally shifted in 31 days.
So, to summarize the core analysis of our deep dive today, 31 days into Operation Epic Fury, the initial promise of a swift, surgical, and dominant victory has entirely vanished.
The conflict has brutally exposed the severe limits of Western conventional military power and supply chains when thrust against deeply entrenched, patient, asymmetric resistance.
As a result of this kinetic exhaustion, we are watching a desperate, highly dangerous push toward an amphibious ground war to secure a symbolic victory.
We are witnessing immense global economic suffering orchestrated through the weaponization of maritime insurance and trade choke points.
And hovering over all of this chaos is the terrifying looming shadow of the Samson option and the genuine threat of nuclear escalation as states are pushed toward the brink of survival.
It is the stark reality of a war of attrition where time, geography, and industrial economics heavily favor the entrenched power over the expeditionary force.
But as we wrap up this analysis, we want to leave you with one final, deeply provocative thought. Something that wasn't the main focus of the military briefings we discussed today, but was buried as a quiet, alarming footnote in our intelligence stack.
Yeah, this is important.
We spent an hour talking about hypersonic missiles, granite bunkers, tank attrition, and naval straits. But there's an entirely different battle space, an invisible front line.
The cyber domain.
Our sources briefly noted, almost in passing, that Iranian-linked hacking syndicates have already successfully infiltrated the personal emails of the FBI chief.
Now take a step back and ask yourself, what happens if the next phase of this kinetic exhaustion isn't fought with ballistic missiles arcing over Tel Aviv, or thousands of Marines dying on the rocky beaches of Karg Island?
What if the war of attrition is fought entirely through the digital grid?
Cyber warfare is the ultimate asymmetric vulnerability for a highly developed, technologically dependent Western society.
Exactly. What happens if this conflict shifts silently across the Atlantic? What happens when the targets are the municipal power grids in your state, the water treatment plants in your county, or the banking apps and financial ledgers you rely on every single day to buy groceries?
For decades, hackers have been hoarding zero-day exploits, flaws in software code that the software creators don't even know exist yet.
If the Persian Gulf can be made utterly uninhabitable by a swarm of physical drones that cost $20,000, what can a synchronized swarm of zero-day digital exploits do to the infrastructure of the western suburbs?
It's a chilling, invisible threat.
We started this deep dive by talking about the loss of a clean, binary understanding of war, where the biggest bomb wins. You could track a Tomahawk missile on a radar screen.
You can't see a cyber weapon until the lights go out and the water stops flowing.
Stay curious. Keep questioning the narratives you are fed. Look past the daily political posturing. And remember that understanding the why and the how behind these massive geopolitical shifts is the absolute best preparation you can have for whatever comes next.